I don't think I can add more words after that quote. It was quite deep and wise, and also rhetoric and some sort of ironic in a way. I would leave the floor open to audience now, and any questions, please. I think we have a couple of questions already kind of mentioned in, so Mr.
Let the person ask it, so then.
Yes, of course. It's Mr. N.G. Khitan. Sir, please.
I would like to, what you are talking about, we have been meeting very often in Bharat Chamber of Commerce, and you have come so many times.
You'll have to put your mic up.
Yeah, mic closer.
Basic issue is that we want, with your talk, that we need ease of living and we have to have ease of business. Now in India, as far as the ease of living is concerned and ease of business is concerned, the biggest deterrent factor is corruption. Our ranking in the world, as you know, is very high. And if you take among a score of 10, then the ranking of India is upon 6.7. How do we take care of that? I mean, what is the solution for that? Though I know, I posed this question to somebody, and he said, you said the Renaissance of Bengal, the Bengal ranks 12, whereas the Maharashtra in corruption, Maharashtra ranks 2 and Gujarat ranks 4, and they are growing. So therefore, the states where there is more corruption, they are growing. State where there is less corruption, West Bengal, which is not growing. But I really don't know. I want an answer.
So what's the question?
The question is that people are really suffering in India. Businessmen are suffering in India. Common people are suffering in India. There is no ease of business. There is no ease of living where corruption is playing a very, very major role.
So let me say that first of all, I am not a great fan of these rankings, as you may be aware, not just in India but worldwide. I will not comment on who is where in that ranking because I don't quite believe them. And my views on the matter is well known. In fact, just this morning, a very well-known institute called Varieties of Democracy Institute in Stockholm just blocked me on Twitter for questioning their methodology. They publish every year the global democracy rankings, in case you are unaware. They also do the Global Freedom of Press Index. So the irony of it is they shut it down. So I won't get into these rankings because they are all, I'm sorry to say, bullshit. But your point is, however, a more serious one, which is this problem of corruption. And I think, let me be even more blunt about it. The real problem now is pervasive small level corruption. That is the real blockage in our society. Earlier on, maybe there was big level corruption. Through reforms of various kinds, we have, I think, solved it to some degree. Maybe not perfect, but I would argue in the last few years, the big level corruption has come down. What has happened is that we now have pervasive small level corruption in our society. Now, what do we do about this? There are two things that we have to ultimately solve for. One of them is administrative reform. We need to begin to seriously have a public debate about reforming our bureaucracy. And we cannot keep going, blaming that we inherited from the colonial sector and all of that. I'm afraid we are now in the 77th year of our independence. This is now our bureaucracy. We need to reform it. And this requires us to have an honest debate as a society about how to go about reforming it. And I have long ideas about it. The other piece of this is that we need to have an honest debate about reforming our legal system. Some part of this, the judiciary has to be a part of. We cannot have a system where any criticism of the judiciary is somehow seen as, somehow destroying the edifice of the legal system if you question very basic things about the judicial system. For example, a few months ago, as some of you will be aware, I raised a very common sense point, that why does our higher judiciary need to shut down for summer vacations, Dashera vacations and winter vacations. It's like any state service that the state provides the citizens. It is perfectly okay for the judiciary to take leave like anybody else. I am also a taxpayer funded person. When I need leave, I ask for leave and I go on a holiday. Yeah, the entire Prime Minister's Economic Council does not shut down. The Finance Ministry does not shut down if the Chief Economic Advisor wants to go on leave. So why does the entire judiciary shut down every time, every year, for such a large period of time? Common sense question, which may have a very common sense answer. But instead of answering me, every Supreme Court judge then passed some snide remarks about this issue. You can Google them up.
Yeah.
The Tamil Nadu Bar Council issued a fatwa against me for raising this issue. Now, as a citizen of this country, never mind as an official, as a citizen of the country, surely I have the right to ask this question. But nobody will ask this common sense question. Why is this common sense question not asked more often? There has to be a public debate on this issue. And these common sense, many of the things I raise are very common sense issues. Why do titans of Indian industry not invest in R&D? Yeah. Why is it that we have a system where our brightest young people spend 5-6 years trying to crack a UPSC exam, which has a 99.92% failure rate in terms of being able to get in, and that you only get into the lowest rung of the bureaucracy? What is this poverty of aspiration we have as a people? So this is a question I have raised. I raise this everywhere. It does not make me popular everywhere. But as Robi Thakur says, Jodi dak shune kyo na ashe.
Yeah. So we have Mr. Chajir also wanting to ask a question, and then I would just move to the table right after this, yeah?
So you have touched upon a number of
Little louder.
number of subjects, and basically about the bureaucracy. You have just mentioned that we should have a public debate, but I really don't understand that how that is going to help, because this has to come down from the highest level of the country, the rulers of the country, that how to fix the bureaucracy. And why I say so, again, I pick up from what Mr. Khaitan said, that the ease of doing business, when today the world is looking at China plus one policy of the manufacturing, somehow or other we are not been able to take that advantages. Of course, government has been very proactive in it. PLIs have been brought about in many sectors. But then somehow or the other, the number of businessmen which could be coming to India are still finding it difficult. And we in fact know for sure that they are going to Vietnam, Malaysia and countries like South Korea and all. So what is that which is stopping? And the second thing I would like to ask is why, in your opinion, not a question exactly, but the Bengali entrepreneurship you mentioned about, why that went bust? I mean, why the Bengali entrepreneurs lost interest in doing businesses rather than be a professor or a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer? Was it because of the risk factor?
No, as I said, the second question, let me answer. As I said, I come from my mother's family comes from a business background. Tragically, they lost their entire business to partition. You can still go to Kushtia and look at the mill lying around there, and there is a big board on it that says enemy property, even today. But the fact of the matter is, I think at some point, other societies have also gone through shocks. The Japanese were completely devastated by the war. They were bombed to the ground. Nuclear devastation. Korea went through the same. Germany went through the same. Many societies at various points in time have gone through utter devastation. So did we. The question is, why did we not rise up from that? And that's why I keep coming back to the point is, at some point, there is a cultural aspect to this that needs to be brought up. no amount of making slow-moving art films in black and white can ultimately compensate for making factories. And that is something that I think we Bengalis did not do after independence. And I think this is something I am trying to deliberately instigate into a debate. About 2 months ago, there was actually an event on this particular issue. I gave a full lecture on the history of Bengali entrepreneurship going back to the ancient times. So it's not just in the in the early 20th century when there were Bengali businessmen. Bengali business has a long history going back to ancient times. Some of the world's largest ports historically, like Tamralipti, Chandruketugarh, were in Bengal. So naturally there were Bengali entrepreneurship. Even Kolkata, people say there were villages here, Sutanoti, Govindapur. They were not villages as agricultural villages. They were villages of weavers. And so they were actually, the Boshaks were traders in cloth. So the point I'm making is that Bengali entrepreneurship has a very old history. So somewhere cultural change has to come, and this is cultural change happens. Maybe a generation from now, we will get it back. But it needs to be deliberately ignited. It does not happen naturally. Just like I am talking about these issues, if you go back to the European Renaissance, the Enlightenment and so on, there were people who actually talked about it. As I said, these people were actually small groups of people who actually knew each other. They were, Florence in the 14 and 1500s were a very small place. Everybody who you talk about who were participants as Renaissance men were actually people who knew each other. So it usually starts with a spark with relatively small people questioning certain frameworks. So I am trying in my small way to maybe light a fire. Hopefully the fire will grow. So that is the context in which I am coming from. But talking about this issue of ease of doing business. First of all, we do beat ourselves up too much. It is not the case that India is not attracting FDI. If you look at gross FDI coming into India and Vietnam, let me be clear, the amount of FDI coming into India is a scale larger than that going to Vietnam. Please Google this up data. I don't remember the data off the top of my head, but we get much more FDI than Vietnam does by a multiple. You can take out your phones and Google this up. We are a much bigger economy than Vietnam. So it is, I used to hear this about how Bangladesh was going to take over the world till just 3 weeks ago. So let us not beat ourselves up. There are things that we are doing right. We are still the fastest growing economy in the world. The amount of people who are moving large amounts of capabilities into India is very large. This has certainly happened in services. Any major company in the world that you can talk to has a very large capability center in India. You talk to anybody. Much of the cutting edge stuff that is happening in artificial intelligence and chip design, etc., actually happens in India. Admittedly, not in the Indian companies, but in the global capability centers of these large companies. So, Google Maps, for example, is an Indian invention of the Google's offices in Chennai and Hyderabad. So, we are a part of the global supply chain already. We may not be producing the chips, but we are designing them. So let's not go into this spiral that we are not doing anything else. This is particularly obvious if you go to places like Hyderabad or Bangalore or Mumbai. Really cutting edge stuff is happening. Even outside Delhi, really cutting edge stuff is happening. The one area where we have not been able to break through is in certain areas of manufacturing. But even there are areas where we are really doing very, very well. Electronics is an area where we are really doing well. And let me tell you, it's not just Apple, but many other areas where we are beginning to now do very well. We are now beginning to make breakthroughs in areas like defense and so on. So while I am being for most of my lecture very, very critical, let me also say that we are doing very, very well in many areas as well. So it is not that we are not competitive, and we are competing even with the best in China. Yes, the gentleman in the dark. Can you identify yourself first?
Yeah. First, I need to identify because the two questions that I'm asking are two diverse questions. Sir,
One question, please, because then others have.
Yeah.
So it's related. So
Okay.
on the topics that you spoke. First, I represent one of the largest private sector universities. I'm the Registrar of Techno India University and Director and CEO of Techno India Group. Sir, you said that classes can be held online, and because we get most of the questions on the YouTubes or the addresses on the YouTubes and the answers on the ChatGPT. First of all, you have noticed that ChatGPT hallucinates a lot. One. Second, if that
So
is
do lecturers, as it happens. But anyway.
yeah. My question on this is that if online would have been so popular or if it could replace, why did institutions open after the COVID where online education was the benchmark? One, the first question. The second question, I'm also a IBBI registered valuer for several banks of the country. IBBI has done a great job, but at the same time, in order to push the business, the bankers want certain things which as an IBBI registered valuer, I cannot adhere to. So there is a discrepancy that what they want, because I cannot make a valuation to please the businessman so that his loan gets passed. So there is a discrepancy. Before I end,
No, two
That's
questions
it.
are more than
no, this is no question. First, a brilliant presentation. I've hardly heard anything like this. Prior to hearing Pranab Mukherjee Sahib on 125th anniversary of Punjab National Bank in our ITC Pala. And this is, and you took us through the past, present and the future.
That's it.
Thanks for that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so for IBBI, let me say that this is an evolving thing, and I fully agree with you that it is IBBI's job, in fact, to make sure that professional valuers remain professionals. And so this is an evolving thing, and we understand that there are pressures on the system. That's why IBBI as a regulator exists. Otherwise, it's not just the banks. Sometimes the bankrupted entity wants you to do. There may be a buyer who wants you to give. So this whole profession of valuation is a very serious one. It's part of the ecosystem of truth tellers in the system that have to be protected, so to speak, by IBBI as the regulator in order to make sure that the truth telling happens. Otherwise, the whole system will fall apart. So I am totally sympathetic with you, but I also sympathize with IBBI that this is an evolving thing, and if there are something specific, then do raise it with them, or even bring it up to my notice, we can raise it. So that is one. Secondly, as far as this point that, I'm assuming you're talking about Byju's going bust afterwards and online systems. Yeah, sure. I mean, creative destruction should happen to everybody. After all, before Google emerged, there were, many of these things, there were all kinds of other, Yahoo existed, Netscape, all these kinds of things existed. So there will be iteration and creative destruction even in this space. But I cannot see how the future of education is going to go in the way it is going today. First of all, I think it's outdated. Two, I think it is wasteful. And three, as far as ChatGPT's biases are concerned, please look at the numerous cases that happened, not just in India and everything, but even in the Ivy League colleges of the US, all those, the presidents of those colleges and how they were deliberately ideologically biasing conversations in their universities. I'm afraid the same biases that are there in ChatGPT are actually there in the universities themselves. In fact, ChatGPT partly has those biases because its algorithms are picking up those biases from existing academia. So, the sources of those left-leaning biases are actually coming from those same academia that is complaining about the biases in ChatGPT. So, on the other hand, ChatGPT's biases are actually more transparent and we can debate what they are. Whereas the biases that happen hidden away from public scrutiny are the biases that happen in academia today in the decentralized way it happens. I mean, look at the way our history is taught. I mean, it's ridiculous. We are basically taught the history of those who invaded us rather than our own history. But it is perpetuated from colonial times right through the last 76 years of freedom, we are still perpetuating that kind of history. Because those biases are continuously, at least if there is something more transparent on something like YouTube, somebody will stand up and debate it. Let's debate it openly.
Right. So
this will have to be the last question because I am beginning to tire.
Yeah, so this is the last question. We'll just take 2 questions, one from the gentleman here and one from you, and that's it.
And take it together so that I can answer.
Yeah, so you can both ask your questions and we just rest the case then. Yeah. Sir, please fast. Huh?
Yeah,
sorry, the lady in front as well.
Yeah.
So 2 questions.
There are too many.
Yeah, the 2 of them and then that's the end of it.
Thank you for your wonderful exposition, Mrs. Sanyal.
A little louder, please.
I also thank Mrs. Victoria for bringing out the best of
Sir,
Mr.
please
Sanyal.
just keep it quick to the question.
See,
Please.
my observation is this, that few years ago you promised that, or rather we expected moon. You have brought us to the moon, but we are only seeing craters over there. Secondly, my belief is this, that after independence, we were not allowed to do business in India. Then it is impossible to do business in India. Then it became difficult to do business in India. And even today, it is not very easy to do business in India. You have already mentioned that you are, sort of sorting out the processes and all those things. How much time it will take, because there is not much patience left in the investors. For example, I have few companies, and it is almost impossible for a foreign company with foreign directors and foreign shareholders to form a company in India. It's very difficult.
So, okay, let me answer that question. I've got
one more.
No, second
sir,
question. No second question. Because then you see, I have to ask.
We'll take opportunities later, please. Huh?
Yeah, so-
Let's be a little cognizant of the
So I think it
speakers.
follows on from the other point. As I said, we beat ourselves up a lot. But 2 things. First of all, we think of the amazing progress we have made. A decade ago, if I had come and asked an audience like this, what are the things you would ask for? You would have asked for infrastructure. You've got the infrastructure. You would have asked for a unified internal market. You now have GST and unified internal market. It may not be perfect, radical improvement on what used to exist. You would have said, I can't patent. Today, we have one of the better patenting systems in the world. So we have made enormous progress. I agree that there are all these other low-level corruption being one, all kinds of things, and we are one by one. I'm literally myself trying to solve them one by one. That does not mean that there is some place where we will reach. This is an ongoing process. 30 years from now, somebody will be asking for further reforms, which should be done at that time. But do not think that we are not making massive progress, number 1. Number 2, even in relative terms, I think we are not bad. So let me also defend India. If you try to do a business today in Germany, let me tell you, you would have to face more regulations than you have to face in India. Ask anybody who is trying to set up a manufacturing unit in Europe today. The number of regulations they have, the utter irrationality of some of them is in a different league. I'm telling you this because many of the bad ideas of India are very often justified by those who want to justify them by saying, look, Europe is doing this. So many of our bad ideas, same thing is happening with many of the problems in our tax system. Many of the bad ideas in our tax system are often justified to people like me by saying, see, this also exists in America. So yes, what we don't want is Europe's regulatory system and America's tax system. So there are many problems in India. We are trying to solve them. It's not perfect, but this idea that somehow we are not making progress and there has to be some losing patience. I'm sorry, you cannot lose patience with this because there are huge opportunities too. And if you think you've lost your patience, well, other people, I can tell you, other parts of this country are taking advantage of those opportunities. There are parts of India, by the way, which have reached a different level from what Calcutta is. Because the amazing opportunities are also emerging and being taken advantage of.
I think so. Just one last question, as Mr.
And it'll
Sanyal
have to be
said,
the
from
last
the lady
question.
in the front.
Yeah.
And
No more. We can have a bilateral conversation, but we can just end it here.
okay.
I'm Alka Karnani and I've got a financial services startup, medium scale. So what you spoke about apprenticeship. So what thought comes to my mind is that here we don't have people who are skilled, who want skill, and we also are the people who are actually skilling on the job. Is there any way where we could, join both of these so that we could also benefit out of it? You've done something for the large scale setups, not for the medium.
So this is a conversation that should be taken up, and I think it's the right path, because unlike many other people, I believe that real education happens in working, not in university. Okay? This is in fact a problem that the West is already facing, that they have now got large numbers of highly educated people who are actually not capable of doing the jobs they wanted to do. Even China did not fix its education system first. It actually just employed people, and they got taught on the job. So apprenticeships, in my view, is far more important to skilling than the education system, other than basic initial education will ever be. So we have made an experiment which you have just announced a month ago by the finance minister about trying to use apprenticeships. It is an experiment. We are trying to grease that system with using some monies. This needs to be extended, I agree, to the MSMEs, etc. Because in the end, working by doing is the single most important way of getting the next generation to understand what to do. I became an economist in the financial sector before I even knew what that meant. I was trained as an economist in India's best college and then in one of the world's best universities. But I can tell you, 99% of what I learned was after I began working. So really getting young people onto the shop floor is a very important part of education. And I think that is something we need to do. And right now we are experimenting with the big guys because it's simply easier to do it. But I agree it needs to be worked out into the MSMEs as well. Yes.
Thank you. We close the session now. I would like you to give a big round of applause to Mr. Sanyal for his persistence, for his passion, and also for sharing his thoughts continuously with us. We would like to now initiate a vote of thanks.
So thank you, Mr. Sanyal. That was indeed quite eye-opening in certain regards. Thank you, Aditi. It was indeed wonderful interacting with you too.